I never thought I'd reach the age of 65 feeling more invisible than ever, and yet here I am, avoiding people as if they carry some unknown contagion, not of disease, but of disappointment, judgment, and obligation. It wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, I thrived in social settings, birthdays, anniversaries, community gatherings. I was the life of the party. But as the years advanced, so did my awareness of how exhausting, draining, and often superficial these interactions could feel. The truth is, at 65, I find solace in my own company and dread the emotional labor of maintaining relationships that seem to demand more energy than I have to give. I want to share with you why I avoid people now, and why this isn't about hatred or misanthropy, but about self-preservation, authenticity, and finding peace in solitude. From childhood, I was taught that social engagement equals happiness. I believed wholeheartedly in that mantra until I realized that forcing myself into gatherings out of obligation or fear of missing out only left me feeling hollow. The small talk, the constant need to appear cheerful, the unspoken competition to reveal just the right life update, it all began to feel like a performance. I started to question, was I connecting with people or merely pretending to connect? At 65, I value honesty more than ever, and pretending became a burden too heavy to bear. So I began declining invitations, becoming the busy friend, the homebody relative. At first, people asked if I was unwell, if I was upset with someone, if I might need help. When I insisted I was simply conserving my energy, some accused me of being rude, distant, or even unfriendly. But what they didn't see was that every interaction, no matter how brief, required emotional investment, an investment I could no longer afford. Another reason I avoid people is the unpredictability of human behavior. Over the years, I've witnessed relationships crumble at the slightest provocation, a difference in opinion, a perceived slight, a moment of miscommunication. More than once, someone I considered a close friend vanished overnight, replaced by rumors or half-truths. I learned that loyalty can be conditional, and that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. As a result, I grew guarded. It's a sad realization, but I began to expect disappointment, so I shielded myself by creating distance. At 65, I've lived long enough to know that people can disappoint you when you least expect it, and that avoidance, to some degree, can feel like self-defense. As time passed. I also noticed how exhausting it was to navigate generational differences. Conversations with younger people, my own children, nieces and nephews, or neighbors decades my junior, often left me feeling out of touch or frustrated. Their references to social media trends, slang, and cultural phenomena sounded like an entirely different language. In turn, they grew bewildered by my reluctance to join them in a group chat or share a funny meme. I found myself at a crossroads: adapt to their world or retreat to mine. Adapting required energy and a willingness to learn that I sometimes lacked. Retreating felt safer. So I chose to retreat. The unfortunate consequence was that isolation became normalized for me, and maintaining relationships across generations felt like an uphill battle. I'm not opposed to social media. I use it sparingly to stay informed. But I've come to resent the curated perfection that others broadcast. When I scroll through my feed, I see smiling couples on luxury vacations, families celebrating milestones, friends posing with drinks in trendy bars. It all looks so effortlessly joyful that I wonder if anyone ever posts their bad days, the quiet sadness, the loneliness, the fear of being forgotten as one ages. I realized the highlight reels of others emphasized what I lacked, and that social media's illusion of perpetual happiness only deepened my desire to withdraw. By avoiding people, both online and offline, I protect myself from comparing my life to theirs, and I guard my mental health fiercely. Another major factor in my avoidance is the rising prevalence of toxicity in social relationships. I've encountered friends who gossip incessantly, spouses who argue publicly, and neighbors who thrive on conflict. At 65, after weathering storms of drama, betrayal, and judgment, I've reached a point where I refuse to let anyone else's negativity seep into my life. If someone thrives on stirring trouble, I would rather not attend the party. If a friend uses me as a sounding board for their endless complaints, I do not have the emotional bandwidth to absorb their sorrow. This isn't to say I lack empathy. I simply recognize that draining relationships became commonplace, and that setting boundaries by distancing myself is a necessity. Boundaries may be invisible, but they protect me from the tidal wave of drama that once threatened to drown me. Yet, there is another, more tender reason why I avoid people: fear of burdening them. As I've grown older, I've faced medical challenges, some minor aches and pains, some more serious health concerns that require regular attention. When acquaintances learned of my health issues, their initial reaction was sympathy, often followed by an unsettling shift in how they spoke to me. They'd lower their voices, pat my hand gently, and sometimes speak as if I were fragile. I know they mean well, but I loathe being treated like someone who cannot handle the simplest of tasks. I've spent a lifetime being robust, independent, useful. Now, the fear of being perceived as weak or pitiful makes me shrink away from interactions because I don't want to become the old person with health problems in everyone's eyes. If I avoid people, I remain just me, not the 70-year-old who can't climb the stairs anymore or the grandma who needs help walking. It's a delicate balance between needing support and wanting to be respected for who I am. In addition, I've always been an introvert at heart, though I didn't fully admit that until later in life. Growing up, I pushed myself to fit the extroverted mold, joining clubs, volunteering for community events, hosting gatherings. I believed introversion was a weakness, a flaw to be corrected. But over time, I realized that my energy thrives on solitude, on quiet mornings with a cup of tea, knitting in my favorite armchair while listening to classical music, or writing letters to old pen pals. These moments rejuvenate me in ways a crowded room never could. Now, as a 65-year-old, I recognize that my introversion is not a defect but a gift. When I avoid people, I'm not rejecting humanity. I'm honoring my own nature and conserving the precious energy I have left. There's also the matter of emotional exhaustion. In the first half of life, building a family, sustaining a career, maintaining friendships, and contributing to the community demanded unrelenting emotional labor. I was a caregiver, raising children, supporting my spouse through career changes, comforting friends through breakups and losses. All of that altered me in a profound way, left me with a reservoir of compassion that never truly refilled. Now, at 65, I look at my emotional bank account and realize I can't afford the withdrawals required to keep up the same pace. Each conversation about nostalgia or career achievements or gossip represents an emotional expenditure that depletes my reserves. By avoiding people, I give myself permission to pause, to grieve, to heal, and to savor the simpler joys: reading a good novel, watching the sunrise, tending to my small garden, activities that fill my cup rather than empty it. But despite all these reasons, I know avoidant behavior has its own pitfalls. Loneliness can creep in like a slow, unwelcome guest, whispering doubts and regrets into my ear. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm missing out on opportunities for genuine connection, if I've let fear and fatigue rob me of experiences that might still bring joy. On days when the wind rustles through the trees and I feel a twinge of wistfulness, I question whether total avoidance is truly the answer. Yet, When I step outside my front door and feel the weight of social expectations pressing on me, I retreat again. I tell myself that in this stage of life, I have earned the right to choose solitude over strain, self-care over social obligation. The world expects retirees to fill their days with volunteering, clubs, travel, and social events. I've tried many of these. I volunteered at the local library, joined a book club, even went on a group trip organized by a senior community center. At first, it felt novel and exciting, connecting with people who shared my interests, exploring places I'd never been. But over time, I noticed the pattern. After an initial burst of enthusiasm, I would feel drained, jittery, wishing to slip away unnoticed. Perhaps this is the paradox of choosing solitude at a time when society glorifies constant engagement. The voices on television, in magazines, and on social media tell me that to age gracefully is to remain social. I reject that narrative. I assert that aging gracefully can mean living life on terms that are gentle, slow, introspective, and self-directed. For me, that means avoiding people more often, creating a personal sanctuary that nurtures the spirit instead of depleting it. It's not just about avoiding humans, it's also about curating my environment. I've arranged my home to feel like a retreat. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, a small library of books I've collected over the decades. I light scented candles, play soothing music, and surround myself with plants that remind me life persists and renews itself each day. My routine is simple: a morning cup of tea by the window, listening to birdsong, a midday nap, tending to my garden in the late afternoon, an evening spent reading or writing in my journal. In this curated solitude, I find meaning. The world outside my walls might be chaotic, but inside, there is a steady heartbeat of peace and reflection. Yet, even as I find tranquility in solitude, I acknowledge the value of human connection. I maintain a few close relationships. My daughter calls me every Sunday without fail, and once a month, my lifelong friend Sarah visits for tea. These interactions are carefully chosen, intentional, and deeply meaningful. When Sarah arrives, we sit for hours, sharing memories, marveling at how time has shaped us, sometimes laughing until our sides ache. With my daughter, we reminisce about her childhood, and I delight in hearing about her grandchildren. These moments remind me that connection, when it's rooted in love, respect, and mutual understanding, can be restorative rather than depleting. But outside of these precious bonds, I prefer to avoid the broader spectrum of social engagements that feel superficial or obligatory. There's also a fear that underlies my avoidance, the fear of change. At 65, I've witnessed my body transform. Wrinkles, slower reflexes, creaking joints. I've seen friends pass away, watched children grow into adults, moved into a smaller home. Change is relentless, and it demands adaptation. Social interactions often underscore these changes. When people comment on the gray hair, ask about retirement plans, or gauge whether I can still drive long distances, I feel like a specimen under scrutiny. By avoiding people, I sidestep these microaggressions and covert judgments. I refuse to be a curiosity or a checklist item in someone else's life. I am not a retiree or a senior or a grandparent. I am a human being with a wealth of experiences, a reservoir of stories, and a tender heart that still yearns for authentic connection. But I choose who to share that heart with, and I do so on my own terms. Another layer to this is the evolving nature of intimacy. In my youth, physical presence equated to intimacy, holding hands, hugging, sharing a meal. As technology advanced, I witnessed how screens began mediating our interactions. Video calls, social media, texting, these tools are marvelous in preserving connections across distances. Yet, I find them insufficient substitutes for unmediated presence. When I decline invitations, I also decline to engage in prolonged digital communications that feel performative or insincere. I'm not dismissing technology, I simply find it amplifies superficiality. A like cannot replace a genuine smile. A voice message can't replicate the warmth of a friend's laughter in the next room. So I retreat from both in-person and digital social demands that don't align with the quality of interaction I crave. And yes, there's guilt. Society paints avoidance as selfish or antisocial. Family members worry that I'm sliding into depression, that my avoidance is a cry for help I'm too stubborn to seek. But I assure them, my solitude is not a symptom of despair. It's an active choice. I've considered therapy. Many therapists encourage social engagement as a balm for loneliness. But what if solitude itself is my balm? What if my mental health thrives when I am alone with my thoughts rather than entrapped in draining social obligations? For years, I measured my worth by how many invitations I accepted, how often I attended parties, how many people considered me a friend. Now, I measure my worth by how true I am to myself, by how much peace I feel when I wake each morning. I'm not lonely. I'm at home with who I am, and I'm learning to embrace the quiet. Sometimes, when visitors arrive unannounced, neighbors dropping off fruit, friends popping by for a quick chat, I feel a pang of anxiety. My heart races at the thought of small talk, of finding something to offer them, of masking my desire to return to my solitude. I used to apologize, explain that I wasn't feeling well or that I was caught up in a project. Now, I simply step outside, smile, and say, "I'm sorry, I'm not up for visitors today," and retreat back inside. I don't feel the need to justify my feelings. Over the years, I've learned that my time is precious and that every refusal is a gift I give myself to remain energetically intact. There's an art to avoiding people gracefully. I maintain a polite demeanor in my limited outings, like grocery shopping or visiting the doctor, so people don't suspect my broader withdrawal. When the cashier asks how I am, I respond with a simple, "I'm fine, thank you," and smile. I resist the urge to invite further conversation. If someone asks about my weekend plans, I reply, "Just staying in, catching up on some reading." Brief, honest, final. I've begun to cherish these small interactions because they remind me that I'm still tethered to the world, even if loosely. It's a balancing act. Stay visible enough to avoid alarming everyone, but distant enough to protect my inner sanctum. Perhaps the most profound reason I avoid people is to preserve my inner narrative. At 65, I am a tapestry of memories, both joyful and painful. There are days when memories of my late spouse flood me with both love and grief. Other days when I recall the laughter of my children at family gatherings and ache for those moments despite the exhaustion they also brought. When I interact with others, I risk losing myself in the current of their lives, their dramas, their expectations. I fear that if I allow too many new stories in, my own narrative will become muted, dispersed among the noise. By avoiding people, I keep the pages of my story crisp and clear, available only to those I choose to share them with. I understand if some view this stance as unkind or antisocial. They may argue that a life well lived requires community, service, and engagement. But I counter that a life well lived also requires self-knowledge, authenticity, and respect for one's own limits. If society expects every 65-year-old to attend bingo nights, join travel clubs, or volunteer at animal shelters, what about those of us who prefer the solitude of our own thoughts? Must we conform to a one-size-fits-all vision of aging? I think not. As the world becomes louder, faster, and more connected, perhaps there's a greater need for those who choose silence, introspection, and withdrawal. We serve as witnesses to the quiet things, the turning of seasons in the garden, the gentle arc of a sparrow in flight, the hush of early morning light. In our avoidance of people, we guard the delicate beauty of moments that might otherwise be drowned out by constant social chatter. If you're someone who sees me as avoiding life, I ask you to reconsider. For me, life is here, in the softness of solitude, in the space between obligations, in the moments of reflection that stretch like gentle waves across the mind. I'm not hiding from the world. I'm choosing a different way to engage with it. Instead of measuring my worth by the number of social engagements I attend, I measure it by the depth of the insights I glean from silence, the solace I find in simplicity, the gratitude I feel for each sunrise that marks another day I get to spend at my own pace. To those who feel judged by my avoidance, I offer reassurance. This is not a judgment on you or your choices. If you find joy in bustling gatherings, in shared laughter, in digital connections, I celebrate that. We each have our own way of finding meaning. My path may be quieter, lonelier to some, but it's richer and more vibrant to me. I may not attend your family reunion, but I carry with me the memory of your warmth when you last visited. I may not call every week, but when I do speak to you, I speak with intention and depth. I may avoid people, but I am not devoid of love, compassion, or appreciation for humanity. As I conclude this reflection, let me leave you with this. If you find yourself, at any age, feeling the urge to withdraw, to avoid the noise and bustle of social life, know that you are not broken or flawed. You may simply be realizing that your energy, your attention, is a treasure too precious to squander on superficial connections. You deserve to protect your inner world, even if it means creating distance between you and the expectations of others.